The Honourable Kyle McGinn.
Thank you, President, and it is a pleasure to stand tonight and give my final members' statement. And of course, it will be about exposing greedy multinationals that on the outside preach social licence and community, but in the depths of their ivory towers tells a darker story. During my time in Parliament, I've always supported the industrial interests of workers, not just in the industry from which I am from, the offshore oil and gas industry, but I back workers in underground mines, open-cut pits in Kalgoorlie, workers in the red dirt of the Pilbara, and vulnerable workers in low-paid occupations who are prime for exploitation by unscrupulous employers. The main industry which I have taken a particular interest in is, of course, the oil and gas industry. As the oil and gas corporates who were ultimately the mobs that I worked for, albeit indirectly as a seafarer on vessels which service the offshore oil and gas fixed and non-fixed platforms and facilities. The big oil and gas corporations purport to uphold the rule of law, but nothing could be further from the truth. Members, we all know in WA we have Michaela Cash, who loves demonising unions for breaking bad workplace laws which restrict the ability for unions to organise and push down wages and conditions. But the real lawbreakers are the white-collar elites with their armies of HR bosses, accountants and lawyers. And these companies use their unlimited resources to avoid paying tax, cut corners on OH&S and rip off workers. And the best in the business at this is Chevron. Chevron are fixated on the bottom line, on maximising short-term profits and exploiting our natural resources without putting much back into developing job opportunities or improving the lives of West Australian workers. Chevron do the bare minimum in this regard, but do their very best in facilitating their contractors to avoid complying with Australian workplace laws. I couldn't tell you how many times I have heard they work for a contractor, not for us. What can we do? I don't know, maybe make them accountable? It's pretty simple. We have to look at Chevron through the prism of their historical non-compliance with the laws of this country. Australians will never forget or forgive Chevron for their transfer pricing scheme, where Chevron were convicted in the federal court in 2017 for ripping off the Australian taxpayers by no less than $340 million. And this was no accident, members. Most things Chevrons do is done with intent, and this includes their decision to steal hundreds of millions of dollars from the ATO. And this ultimately means the average Australian worker has paid for that. Chevron's parent company in the US lent them $2.5 billion to its Australian entity, with the interest charged at a massively overinflated rate. This was done to reduce profits earned by its Australian entity and avoid paying tax along the way. Chevron actions were deliberate, unlawful, and nothing short of disgraceful. Chevron haven't learnt a lesson about maintaining their social licence and lost this when they engaged in tax avoidance. And a matter which is fundamental to Chevron maintaining its social licence is the need to employ Australian workers for work on or connected to their West Australian oil and gas facilities. Members, this is something that I would expect everyone in this chamber would agree with. It has come to my attention that Chevron is now seeking to sack several hundred of their engineers that are working at Elizabeth Quay headquarters. And they're going to outsource these several hundred jobs to exploited workers in India. They will say it as an engineering office of excellence in India, but we all know it will be low paid, bad HR, and barely any conditions fit for any worker to work in. Chevron are flying in the face of the Barrow Island Act 2003, which requires Chevron to employ local workers wherever possible. And it is entirely possible to employ Australian engineers in this workforce. They've been doing it for 2 decades. They have Australian engineers that are perfectly capable to continue doing it for another 2 decades and further. Australian engineers are amongst the most highly trained, highly skilled in the entire world. So why are we seeing Chevron sacking Australian workers? Are they saying we can't do the work? I allege, members, it is something far more sinister. I allege that Chevron hates Australian workers. They want to offshore these jobs to an office in India and operate their juggernaut mining and oil and gas remotely. So Chevron come to WA, pillage our resources, throw us a few scraps in the forms of jobs, and decide once the holes are dug that they're going to sack them and replace them with foreign remote labour. It's a shame. Australian workers must come first, and I urge this parliament to hold Chevron to account. Now, I haven't stood here lightly. I have reached out to Chevron, who were meant to contact me back and have a meeting, which I was looking forward to discuss this wild rumour that they're going to get rid of engineers. Now, instead of reaching back to me, they have decided not to contact me, which I don't think will surprise many in this room. I did hear, though, on the grapevine that they haven't made a decision on how many jobs will be lost on their Australian enterprise yet. Okay, let's start from there. No jobs should be lost on the Australian entity. No jobs should be offshored to their centre of excellence in India. You came here, you drilled a hole, you used West Australian workers. Simple. That's how you're going to do it, Mr Chevron. Similarly, the state agreement between Chevron and WA government for the Wheatstone project requires Chevron to employ local WA workers. I, for one, am sick and tired of hearing companies like Chevron mainly gloating about their profits, pretending that sponsoring an event and putting your badge on something is a social licence. I've had a gutful of our resources being exploited by a company who in a heartbeat would sack hundreds of engineers and replace them with foreign workers. Sacking Australian engineers and replacing them with Indian workers does not pass the pub test. Does not. It is deplorable behaviour. I urge the WA and the federal government to step in and hold Chevron to account. These are good, high-paying jobs on our resource sector, and we cannot afford to allow them to be outsourced. But it is typical of Chevron. They have no regard for Australian workers or Australian laws. So I bring the Chamber's attention to how Chevron have been ripping off their contract workforce on the Gorgon and Wheatstone facilities for the last decade. Companies like disgraced contractor UGL have been allowed to use sham arrangements to avoid bargaining with their workforce legitimately through enterprise agreements. Chevron's model of exploiting contractors' employees over the past decade has been to facilitate a contracting employer to set up a $2 shelf company. These companies have no offices, no assets and no business other than to employ workers through a pyramid labour type arrangement, with their parent company owning the sham hire business. The $2 shelf company employs 3 employees. So the employees who have never set foot on a Chevron facility and have never worked a day in their life in the oil and gas industry, they get to vote up the agreement that other workers have to work under. And this dodgy, corrupt, unethical and unlawful agreement is then used to employ hundreds of workers who are denied the opportunity to negotiate their rates of pay under an EBA. While Chevron and their HR bosses are the puppet masters, there is an endless stream of contractors who have signed up to facilitate Chevron's institutionalised wage theft. And I want to acknowledge the Offshore Alliance in particular, their legal team led by Zach Duncalf, who is blowing apart these corrupt baseline agreements at the moment. And these include from following contractors who are up to their necks in this: UGL, AGC, CAFA, Urtec, PowerTech and Ventia. And one of the grubbiest is Workforce Logistics, who did an enterprise agreement which paid workers less than the minimum award rates of pay and was found by the full bench of the Fair Work Commission to be a sham and a scam facilitated by Chevron. Right there, on paper. Once again, great work by the Offshore Alliance in exposing Chevron's unlawful employment rorts. Maybe Chevron should start paying the Offshore Alliance to lead the compliance amongst their grubby contractors. I dare say that's going to help them. Chevron are without doubt the pariah of the West Coast oil and gas industry. And could you imagine, members, if the other side of this chamber had their way, they would, through the scowl of Michaela Cash, seek to end unions in this country. Chevron wears the pants in the coalition family. This you can be very sure of. So I would like to see a change. I'd like to see Chevron brought to a hilt on this. They should not be outsourcing the workforce. They should not be attempting to get rid of jobs that have been here for 2 decades. They deserve to still keep them. Just because it's now operational doesn't mean you can get rid of them. So I look forward to seeing some action on this, and I want to say that you can be assured I may be finished in this chamber, but untrustworthy, grubby companies like Chevron, be assured I will continue to fight so that West Australians get